So, in my ongoing tirade against the word literal, there are two situations in which almost all translators agree. It doesn't matter whether they're doing a formal equivalent translation or a functional, a dynamic translation. There are two things that people generally agree on. One of them is metaphors. Metaphors are really hard to translate. Now, if you have the same metaphor in English that they have in Greek or Hebrew, then it's easy. But that rarely happens. The other thing that makes metaphors difficult is that metaphors are often part of our passive vocabulary. Not many of us speak metaphorically. We use our active vocabulary. We can understand what's called our passive vocabulary, where many metaphors sit, but we don't tend to use them in normal conversation. And then the other thing, of course, is that metaphors are so cultural that lots of times, even way in the distant past in one culture, you still might kind of have an understanding of what a metaphor means, but in the target language, it's not there. You can't do it. So metaphors are very difficult to translate, and I don't know of anyone who would really insist that metaphors be translated literally, meaning word for word, because they're often nonsense. But here's an example I came across the other day. I was reading in the CSB, and it said, "Protect me as the pupil of your eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings." The Net Bible has the same translation. I looked at that. Pupil? Pupil? What on earth? I never heard that in my life before. Pupil? And so I looked it up in the NASB, and it says, "Keep me as the apple of your eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings." And I go, oh, okay, that's what I'm used to thinking. It's, apple of the eye is a metaphor. It means precious. It means special. And so you're going to, keep me as you would keep someone who's special. So if it's a metaphor, and if another language doesn't have the metaphor, what are you going to do with it? Now, here's what's really interesting. I looked up the Hebrew of the word behind apple. Guess what the Hebrew word means? Pupil. That's actually what the expression is, pupil. And so the translators have to decide whether this is a metaphor, and does pupil of the eye equate in English to apple of the eye, or is it not a metaphor at all? You notice the verb with the CSB is protect me. Protect me as the pupil of your eye. In other words, the pupil is very precious, and so you're going to protect it, right? So it can't be, you have to change the verb of endearment with apple of the eye to protection if it's not a metaphor. How are you going to do that? I mean, this is the challenge of metaphors, and I guess in this case, even determining whether something is a metaphor. I was speaking once in Shanghai, and I used the expression straddle the fence. And right then it hit me that I had not seen any fences in Shanghai between houses. I mean, most of the people are in apartments anyway, but I hadn't seen fences. And so I stopped and I asked the translator, "How did you translate that?" And she laughed and she goes, "A foot in two boat." That's the closest metaphor in Mandarin to straddle the fence. They don't have singular and plural in Mandarin other than with a few personal pronouns. So it's a foot in two boat, because it's two, it's more than one boat. And they told me, and I don't know Mandarin, but they told me that it's actually not quite the same metaphor, but it's the same kind of idea. You got a foot in these two different boats. Metaphors are difficult, and when it comes to discussions of literal translations or accurate translations, metaphors, everyone agrees that metaphors are difficult. The other thing along with metaphors are idioms. An idiom is when you have a phrase and the meaning of the individual words don't add up to the meaning of the phrase. All right? So a best example is into the age. In Luke 1:33, it says that Jesus will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. Eis tous ionas. Well, eis means into, tous is the, ionas is age, into the age. Well, it's an idiom. It means forever. And there's a similar idiom, eis tous ionas, and then they add ton, ionon, into the ages of ages, which is getting translated as to whom be glory forever and ever. Now, what's going on with this particular idiom is the Greek view of history is cyclical, and you go through a period of time, and there's the destruction, and then there's the rebirth of all things, and then you do the same thing all over again. It's a circular view of history. The Jewish view of history is totally different. It's linear. And you go, you're in this age, and then the Messiah comes, and then you enter into the next age, which is the Messianic age. Now, the difficulty here is that, yes, there's a temporal element to the Messianic age. It does go forever. So into the age, into the Messianic age, does mean forever. But there's a lot more going on than just without limit, time-wise. That there's a quality of life in the Messianic age that's unlike our current age. And so by translating the idiom totally in temporal terms, we're losing that qualitative meaning to it. And well, there's no way to do it. You just can't get both. No way I've ever figured out. But the point is, when it comes to literal, word-for-word translations, everybody agrees that both metaphors and idioms are a class of constructions off by themselves, and everyone is going to translate them dynamically. They're going to look at what did it mean in the original, and then how do I say the same thing in the target language. Okay? No one's going to go word for word on these. Of course, that brings up a really interesting point, doesn't it? When the words don't convey meaning, you have to look at the meaning and say, how do I express the same meaning in our case, in English? What's that telling you? What's primary? The form, the words, or the meaning conveyed by those words? See, I'm formulating an argument that says, if you translate word for word until that translation doesn't mean anything, and so you have to shift over and translate meaning, which one are you saying is primary? The words or the meaning? Well, I'd say the meaning's primary, because that's when it doesn't convey meaning, you have to change your translation philosophy, as it were, and you have to convey the meaning of the original. Well, that just means the meaning is the most important. So an accurate translation is one that conveys the meaning of the author without embellishment, without exaggeration. So much for word for word.